You might have noticed that both of the songs I sang this morning were adapted poems. One asks, what's the sense of leaving your house if you're not going to go look for what's real in the world? And the other one asks, what's the sense of staying in your house if all you want to do is hide from what's real in the world? And I chose those two songs deliberately because our guest speaker, poet, reader this morning is a fine writer for many reasons. She lives her passion. She lives in many ways, she lives her DNA. She was born with a birth defect that left her particularly sensitive to the world in ways that most of us aren't, and that's reflected in her writing. She's the author of The House of Bone and Love Iraq and 40 different young adult fiction books and just a whole slew of writing. She's been published in every poetry journal that's worth being published in. She's received the Ritter-Brenner Fellowship, and she's the director of Gemini Inc. But more than that, she's a sensitive being trying to figure out how to make sense of the world and live in it with a heart wide open. Won't you please join me in welcoming Sheila Black?
That intro is like a poem, kind of hard to live up to. I'm so pleased and honored to be here this morning. I'd never come to one of these, and they're fabulous. I love it.
Good. Welcome home.
Start showing up.
There you go. Now you know my hidden agenda in asking you here this morning.
Yes.
Actually, my hidden agenda in asking you here this morning is because I want to adapt some of your poems to music too. Because your imagery is so precise and yet so universal.
You know, I sort of learned that. I had a teacher who was this famous poet, Jack Gilbert. He the famous Jack Gilbert. And after my first workshop with him, I went to meet him, and he said, you have a nice sense of the shape of a poem. You have a good sense of what you want to say. And then he said, but your details are so boring. And I was devastated for about 24 hours. But then I realized he was right, because Jack's big belief, which I think kind of relates to what you're doing at Celebration Circle, was he thought the names of things were kind of holy. Like when he taught poetry, he said that the noun and the verb was like Adam in the Garden of Eden. The noun is the name of something, which is really powerful. And he would ask us to all look at our shoes and how many of us could name all the parts of our shoes, or look out the window, how many of us could name the actual trees that were out there. And I suddenly realized I couldn't. You know, I'd been walking through the world, and I'd be like, those are trees. They're nice trees, you know. And I became so much of a better observer because of that one piece of advice. And it worked. Yeah. Names.
Yeah. And kind of tying into that, and also to help promote this series that you're doing, Earth Talks. It's all about the details of living poetically in a planet that's changing rapidly.
Yes. Well, first let me do a little plug for Gemini Inc. How many of you know Gemini Inc.? Yeah. And www.geminiinc.org. We have 3 semesters of classes every year. We're trying to have more cost-effective, meaning everyone can afford them, multi-sessions. We have Barbara Renaud Gonzalez teaching one this semester on writing for social justice, which I think is a great topic. We have another 4-part class I'm going to take on writing in form, because even in poetry, using form in your poetry, I've never been any good at that. And then we have Earth Talks. Unfortunately, the first one is September 30th, which is your big celebration, but they're at the Central Library. They're going to be every Tuesday for 4 weeks, starting next Tuesday, but going on. And every week, people are going to get together in a circle following the St. John's College method, which is simply asking an essential question. And the essential question we want to ask is, how can poets and scientists come together to talk and listen to the earth and address really what's going on in terms of climate change, the rapid threat to species? Basically, I just want the community to kind of come together and really talk about what is our relationship to Earth at this time. And I think they should be interesting conversations. And we feed you well. You know, that's always a good thing. Conversation, you need food. I think I do. It's funny listening to all the, it's as if I had been channeling psychically what you were going to talk about, because I was going to read all new poems today. And I guess I've been thinking a lot about the ways in which we're separated from what's around us and are sort of fundamentally related to it, to the nature around us. And I'm going to start by reading a poem I wrote thinking about ancestry. It's called Prehistoric Humans. And it's set sort of, you know those caves in France that you've probably seen films or pictures of, where people painted the animals so carefully? Well, there's a famous one called Chauvet that's called the Cave of the Bears. And they really believe at a certain point they figured out that in ancient times people would go in and sleep with the bears when the bears were hibernating. They think this was a religious ritual. I mean, it wasn't like they slept with the bears all winter. But there was a very kind of close relationship between the human and the bear. So this poem's a little bit about that. The guide says they slept in the cave of the bears. He says they slept while the bears were sleeping, hibernating the winter. Fur and sharp smell. Us with our ugly Birkenstocks, our tourist shorts. Beside the station, a red kiosk. In this train station loo, a sink that smells of carbolic, lavender soap, the plastic wood-paneled bar. Red-faced men speaking in taut voices, their hands gesturing. What hands can do, and the cloudy-haired woman fetching the drinks. You wouldn't want to sleep too soundly, someone says. You wouldn't want to forget all the ways they might wake up. At the butcher shop, the carcass of a pig hangs upside down, dripping blood. Maybe our ancestors drew them, made necklaces from their teeth and hung them around necks, because it was like love. That room of wet fur and fear, that room with their strange hearts. All right, the next poem I'm going to read will be a switch of pace. I've read this a few times lately. I'm sure most of you have children. My youngest daughter is 14, and it's such a distinctive age, right out of middle school. There's something about them at that age. So this poem is a poem I wrote for her, and it's called Travels with Eliza, but it's also called The Big Empty, because we were driving back and forth from New Mexico to here, which is where we were originally from, and I asked somebody once, what was West Texas? Somebody said to me once, oh, you've been driving through the Big Empty, which I don't think it's really empty, but what a name, The Big Empty. So this is The Big Empty for Eliza. Can everyone hear me? Good. She wants to know if the other universes have a consciousness. Like, maybe we are like cells in a giant, giant body. The body has no idea what we are thinking. She wants a pomegranate, blueberry, lemon slushie from Sonic. It is healthier because it has fruit, she says. She says, my thighs are so huge. At Fort Stockton, she chants, windmill, windmill, oil well, drawing hearts on the sleeve of her notebook, then with her finger on the dust that has crept across the car windows. Road trip, destination, land of enchantment. It doesn't look any different than where we came from, she says. Where are we going? Cells just travel round and round. You know this? She turns up the music on her iPhone. The band is called 5 Seconds of Summer. If she had a wish, she announces, she would be surfing with them instead of road tripping with us. What is healthier, she wonders aloud, cheese fries or tater tots? Tater tots, we all say at the same time. In 10 minutes, we will exit the highway. drive 30 miles to a bald, flat-topped mountain. We will get in a short line and view the telescope, which scientists claim can peer so far into space, it is the same as looking at the beginning of time. What will we see? The dust on the lens? A muzzy cluster of star? She will tell us outer space smells like barbecue because the stars keep burning up, because the stars keep burning. She will squint up through the glass, run her finger across the star map, outline her lips in Bert B's Berry Bliss. Whose cell am I? She will ask. Universe, universe. It is I, Eliza, calling. Well, when I was a kid, I really didn't understand the difference between the word mourning and mourning, like grieving. And so you know that famous play you read in high school by Eugene O'Neill called Morning Becomes Electra? I never understood what that title meant. I thought it was Electra was something that happened when the world turned to morning. I was like, morning becomes electric? And so years later, I mean, I'm old enough that I've had losses in my life. I think everyone has. And I think that what you find is that grief is a little bit like a country. There's no sort of shortcuts around it. You have to kind of walk through it. So I'm still kind of confusing mourning and mourning, which is kind of what I do in this poem, which is called Mourning, as in the day, but it's sort of about mourning. The story of mourning is the story of cheatgrass spread over concrete like corn for a chicken, and the sky lightening as if a series of bandages were being unwrapped into a wound, from a wound. At first, I wake as into water, as into nothing. Then I remember you again, and love plucks me back like cheatgrass in my hands, or a glass I have broken, and the tiny splinters that glitter and mix, sand dust and blood. If you came back, I imagine I would smell you like pine trees, and I would not know what to say, my hands fluttering around me like birds whose home tree is burning. And I wish it were not like this. But who would I be without this burden? How would I know myself without this longing, which is unanswerable as the sky now? The sun rolling over like a fish, bright-bellied, huge, and all the noising of so much and more life in the bushes, each aspen, the bladed grass. I am holding myself tight and walking into it, as I used to walk into the still pond at my friend's house in the Catskills. And when the mud stirred up from the bottom, the water clouded with green. I could say love is only a confusion, and also what we are made for, the pieces of us bleeding up. I like to write poems in series because I'm secretly a totally lazy person. And so, not lazy, but I have to trick myself to keep, insecure. So I have to trick myself sometimes to keep writing. So I've been writing this series for a while that's called, whereas if I have a series, some idea I'm working on, I can always go back, oh, I know I'm writing another poem about. So I've been writing a series, this is new, called How to Photograph the Moon, because I've been thinking about the moon and all the ways we're related to the moon. Have you ever looked at an almanac and how they have a million different moons? Harvest moon, blue moon, big fat moon, I mean, it goes on and on. And so in each of the poems, I'm trying to say something different or imagine almost a different moon. And this one is about this figure who interests me a lot. She was one of the first women scientists, and her name was Carolyn Herschel. And she and her brother, William Herschel, built the first telescopes that were able to see really far into space. And what was really extraordinary about it was up until that point, people really thought of the sky kind of like the ceiling of a church. They thought it was kind of like a ceiling with the stars sort of painted on it, like pretty lights painted on it. They didn't really know how big space was. And so there's this famous scene in history when she is the one who really figures out how big space is. And she's helped her brother. I mean, it was really laborious. They were poor German immigrants in England. They had no money. And they were itinerant musicians, but they became fascinated by astronomy. So they started, like, every time they had a little extra cash, they would spend it on glass that they would make into lenses. And she would help her brother he would have to polish them continuously. So she would come up this ladder he was working on to kind of see what, because he had to polish it while he was looking through it. She would come up this ladder to feed him, bite at a time, so he didn't have to stop doing what he was doing with the lens. But anyway, there's this famous scene where she looks through this telescope and she says, "Brother, it's an ocean. Space is an ocean." And it's such a moving moment because suddenly she really understands how vast creation is. And after that, my poem is not going to seem so spectacular, but it's about Carolyn Herschel. And so it's for her. How to photograph the moon, number 1. It makes you drunk, that face so open, slid up inside the dark sluice of the sky, as if it kept turning towards you, kept whispering, "Here, no, here," until you grow concerned that it never changes. Where are the wrinkles, the eyes dimmed with the sight of too many roads, the houses with fences, curtains, the people with Milky Ways inside them? The moon just keeps her mouth open, as always, calling the tides, and who even knows how? A pull inside as you twist the lens, thread that will always be part broken, part shining line that reels you ever back across the shoals, until you picture her as a city which contains all the relics you have forgotten, a dust, brittle and unused, and they remain inside. The woman astronomer who fed her brother like a bird, and she the first to glimpse the celestial firmament, not as God's ceiling, but as his ocean of wrecks and sargasso, alive, changeling, which she would learn to read alone in pained solitude, the moon singing always to herself. And this is a nice short one. I'm from Minnesota, and so I wrote a poem about being from Michigan because it's next door. So this poem's called How to Be from Michigan, and it's to a friend of mine called Craig Holden, who's a mystery writer who loves Michigan. Like, he's lived in the Southwest for years, but his favorite team is this team, the Detroit Tigers, that have this terrible record. And so that's kind of his life, heartbreak over the Detroit Tigers. So this poem's really me channeling him, but we're both kind of writing about being from the Midwest, never having gone back. You never forget how to be from Michigan, with Minnesota next door, mysterious as a blue bench filled with acorn and birdseed. You never forget how to drive a stick shift, the mystery of muscle memory, or how to ache at the sound of that one name, that one shape in the air. You never forget the map in your head, the one that leads you back to Black Oil Lake, chicken-fenced warehouse, to the taut lives you glimpsed riding the bus to work, that year of epic hope and black oil despair. You never forget how to bone a trout and fry it in the black iron skillet until it is crisp on the outside, lake tender within. Or the word Michigan itself as it takes shape in your mouth, the lake bone, the notched twig, name you hold, that close-mouthed secret. One more. One or two. Vote. Two. All right. Then I will read two more. This poem comes from, I spent a lot of years on in New Mexico and southern New Mexico, kind of on the U.S.-Mexico border. And I don't know how many of you have been to El Paso or that part of West Texas. It's a very austere landscape. It's a real desert landscape. And I always thought about how most religions are invented in the desert, and I think I kind of know why, because there's not a whole lot. You have to really learn to look closely to kind of see things, It can be very sere and difficult, but then it's also a very beautiful place. Every time it rained in New Mexico, the whole world would transform overnight. Anyway, so I was thinking about the idea of migration. I kind of feel that all of us in our lives are migrants. We have to move. We love to move. We have to move. Moving is what's hard for us, but also what keeps us alive. Change. And so this poem is called Migrant. Love doesn't live here anymore, but she carries it like water, a small shot glass, a cup. She must climb the stairs. She must take the hot tray with the flowers. She must leave the patient asleep. She must shed her shoes to cross the field sideways. She must stare at the cows chewing blind, imagine their life in desert stockades. Study every sky for signs of rain, the kind that falls and never strikes earth. She must carry, like a small pen, the ability to reframe. She must carry, like a taut coil of wire, the compulsion to build her fence wherever she goes. The secret of words is that they shut out. The secret of borders is that they beg a crossing. The secret of water is that it must spill, seep, and darken. The secret of love is that it must divide. And she stares at her garden, where she must learn, even here, under this brutal sun, whatever will not shrivel must grow. And so the other series I've been writing besides How to Photograph the Moon is called Little Prayer, because it always feels like my prayers are really small. They're not very big. And this is another New Mexico poem. I didn't really realize till I moved from New Mexico. I lived there for about 13 years. I think landscapes always enter us, but often for me, I write poems about places I've left, and I never really knew I loved as much as I did. Does that make sense? Like, I endlessly complained about the desert when I was there, and now I'm like, oh, I write about it. So this is Little Prayer 4, so there's other little prayers. But I think this kind of relates to our talk this morning from Rudi and Zet about how we're linked to nature. I mean, I really believe that one of the big things that's happening right now is there's a lot of things that divide us from the natural world, and we all kind of feel we have to get closer to it. Not in a sort of dumb, sentimental way, because one thing you learn when you live out in the desert, nature's tough, but it's also where we go to renew ourselves. Little Prayer 2. I understood when I saw the tree ghost green in the gray mesa. I was on my way to the Rio Puerco, where there is never any reason to stop, though I did. I wanted to let go of a box of dust. I wanted to let go of my tired formulations. I had a vision of a woman whose flesh melted away in sheets, whose eyes burned inward until they were blue as New Mexico sky. Somehow I knew this meant she could no longer see. And that tree, it was as if I were touching its rough bark, the impossibly furred leaves, my sad bones making circles through the air, that I would keep moving, and despite everything. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.